All right, here we go. John Burton with you again. This is our weekly coffee group teaching, and we're going to continue in this series, Four Fires, and we're talking about the city fire or the multitudes. Now, before I get started, I've just got to deal with an issue right off the bat here. And I've dealt with this issue quite a bit in the past. I've written on it, and we are living in a time where we must be locked in and we must be in position. The enemy is doing wonders. He's brilliant at what he's doing. He's doing wonders for the kingdom of darkness by scattering people. And I know I've talked about the scattering movement. I've talked about that actually quite a bit, where the enemy's scattering the church, bringing confusion into the church, bringing rebellion into the church. And I've got to spend just a little bit of time on this today, just off the cuff. Here's the idea. If we want to see a city fire, we want to see God move remarkably on a city level, we're going to have to get used to the idea of submission to leadership. This is a topic, man, that, honestly, it's difficult for pastors to hit on this because it seems quite self-serving. I have no problem dealing with this. I've never had a problem dealing with this, because the idea that somehow rebellion and a spirit of control on an individual level is healthy for kingdom advance. The enemy's convinced the church, so much of the church, that it's healthy, that it's okay, that it's appropriate. And, again, I've written on that. My book, Covens in the Church, is about that. And people, we live in a very, very independent culture. We don't like to be told what to do. We don't like to be called on the carpet. We don't like the idea of submission, and we have this fantasy. It's a fantasy that somehow we are only to submit to God and not to man. Boy, how convenient that is. Listen, how many times have people just pulled the God card and they God told me to do this, and well, how do you argue against that? Well, we need to argue against that. We need to teach on that because, man, I've been in ministry a long time, and so often people use the God card, and it's very dangerous, in order to fulfill their own desires. And that's using the Lord's name in vain, putting God's name on something that he did not sanction, okay? Now, it's not uncommon for people to have arguments that, well, I'm not called. Or let me say it this way. They'll say, well, Christ is the head and not man. So that's the argument. Well, the question is God going to introduce confusion into a situation by calling us to rebel against authority at the same time that we're called to submit to authority? This is something that I've never heard anybody sufficiently answer, because the argument is, well, I'm going to just do what God wants me to do, and it doesn't matter what people think, it doesn't matter what leaders think, because they have no say in the matter at all. Well, why do I need to talk about this right now as we're dealing with this issue of four fires? We're dealing with the issue of a city fire. Here's why. If we are going to be people who are functioning as in the city church, that means that there is going to be city leadership. Now, this, man, I tell you, this just opens a giant can of worms. And I mean a big can of worms. Just imagine a big can of worms. That's what we're dealing with right here. Because not only does that require everybody to rightly submit to authority on a city level, it requires pastors of churches and leaders to also submit to God's delegated authority on a city level. Now, we don't really see that anywhere in this nation, right? There's so much hatred and bitterness against leaders that the idea of having apostles and prophets and leaders on a city level, well, you've got to be kidding me, is the idea that most people have. And so here we are talking about this city level outpouring, which, again, remember, there's over 19,000 cities in the nation, and 0 are experiencing the biblical normalcy of revival. There's none. And so we're talking about this city outpouring, yet we don't yet know how to submit to authority. Okay? God does establish authority whether you like it or not. In fact, God establishes good authority. He establishes poor authority. He establishes weak authority, and he establishes evil authority. All right? This is a very, very important point. And it's not uncommon for me to have discussions with people, and this usually comes around the idea of leaving churches. And so the idea is, well, if God tells me to leave a church, I'm going to leave a church. And my argument is always, well, why would God introduce confusion into a situation? And God is giving a leader a responsibility of watching out for your soul, is what the Bible says. And he has a responsibility of leading you. God is he's holding him to that. He's calling him to that. And not only that, but God's calling a leader, whether it's a local church leader, or whether it's a small group leader, whether it's a city church leader, he's calling that leader to fulfill a mandate. He's giving them a mission, okay? And if people simply jump ship, they abdicate the responsibility, they fail because of an independent spirit, because they don't want to submit, because they don't appreciate what's going on in the church, because they don't like the leadership, because so they jump ship, and now the mission of the church is at risk. Somebody asked me today, I was having a conversation today. Somebody asked me a great question, and I always enjoy these conversations. They asked me, they said, all right, John, so are you saying that somebody should remain in a lukewarm church instead of leaving and finding an on-fire church? My answer to them was absolutely, you stay in that lukewarm church. And for so many people, that seems like craziness. But you stay in the church until an appropriate process is completed. So if God plants you. This is what we don't understand. We are not independent, okay? We cannot take control over our own lives. So God plants us. He plants us in a city. So when my wife and I, we moved to the city church of Branson, Missouri, okay? We moved here. God moved us to this region. We did not move here just because we wanted to. We were assigned. So my family and I, we don't have the option to leave, right, until he says, leave. So we were called to this city. And similarly, we're also called to a specific church here in Branson. And we are assigned by God in that church. So I don't ever have the option just to simply leave, right? In fact, we had and I love my church here in Branson. We had a meeting just yesterday, and it was a great meeting. And this is a church plant, and they're developing and they're growing, and they're training people up and getting them into positions. And so we had a meeting yesterday, and for ushers and for greeters, and I was invited to be a part of that because I'm happy to serve and however they want me to. And so they had a list of things that we needed to do. For example, we need to show up 30 minutes before a service. This is simple stuff. So with them being my authority, I don't really have an option to show up late, right? I need to honor them and honor God by submitting to their call to show up 30 minutes early. I need to honor them by being willing to serve. Is my ultimate calling in life being an usher, being a greeter? Well, no, there's more going on in my life, but I don't devalue that. And so I need to honor them. I need to submit to them by being involved in that. So this is extremely important. This is very, very simple stuff. If you can't submit with the simple stuff, you're never going to submit in the greater scenario as this unfolds. And so, but let's say, for example, my church becomes kind of lukewarm. It's not, by the way, but let's say it does. Does that suddenly nullify God's call on my life to submit to the leadership of the pastor and the team? Absolutely not. Because if I think about it this way, if I'm called to submit to judges many of them aren't even Christian, and many of them are even corrupt, and I'm called to submit to police officers, and I'm called to submit to my boss at work, for example, it sure makes sense that I would submit to spiritual authority, right? And so if my church is lukewarm, that doesn't, I think we have this idea that there's all of these qualifiers And it's on the leadership to lead in a certain way. And if they don't lead exactly according to these qualifiers, then that frees me from my obligation to submit and to serve. It's not true. It's simply not true. Yeah, you may go through a year or 6 months or 2 years or however long the time may be of struggle in a church that isn't feeding you, that isn't causing you to come alive and these types of things. Why? Because God's called you there to serve, right? He's called you there to minister. He's called you there to bless. He's called you there to lift up the arms of the pastor. And so, no, we don't just have the option just to leave a church because it's lukewarm or because it's not the style that we want it to be or it's not meeting our needs. I've shared this so often that the responsibility of the church is not primarily to meet our needs. It's not primarily to feed us. Come on, all you lazy people. Feed yourself. Quit putting it on the church. Someone made a comment. I was in this thread today, made the comment, well, if they're not meeting the needs of my family and my children, and they're not, then I have a responsibility of my family to leave. No, you're a big baby. You've got to feed your kids yourself. Come on. We need to get off the milk. We need to grow up. Okay? The church here in Branson, I do not lean on them whatsoever. I appreciate them when they do certain things, but I don't lean on them whatsoever to meet the needs of myself or my family. Okay? So that frees me up. So now I don't have expectations on them to serve me. I have expectations on me to serve them. So they can go through a season of struggle. They can become a little lukewarm. And by the way, again, I got to keep saying it. They're not. I love my church. They're just on fire. But let's just pretend we're living in a real world. So that can happen. And it doesn't matter. I'm not saying that I'm going to enjoy it if it's a lukewarm environment, or I'm going to enjoy it if there's tension and stress or strife or issues. I'm not going to say that at all. But I'm saying I did not plant myself there. And I can't unplant myself when things are not going according to my demands. I serve. I love. I honor. Okay? You've got to get this. Because if we're going to function on a city level, we better figure out this submission to authority thing. Because this is going to go up to the level of pastor. What happens on a city level when city leadership, those that are apostles and prophets of a city, and their calling is clear, and God just lands on them and calls an entire city church solemn assembly on next Sunday morning. Pastors are going to have to leave their Sunday programs and lead their people into the solemn assembly, understanding they're not going to receive tithe that week. They're not going to be able to do the things they planned on doing that week. So pastors are going to have to submit on a city level. Those under the authority of pastors and leaders are going to have to submit. And if we can't even do this on a local level, what in the world? How in the world do we think that there's going to be efficient, strong, anointed, and powerful church government on a city level? Why do we think that's going to be the case if we have such a hard time submitting on a local level unless things are exactly the way that we demand that they be? I really want to drive this home. I have communicated this message so many times over the years, and there is so much, it's evil, everybody. And there's so much pastor hatred, leader hatred, distrust, spirit of independence. And people are lifting their hands in worship as if they're holy, as if they're living rightly. And this has to come to an end. Let me speak straight to you. You probably need God to work on your heart, because I ask God to work on my heart all the time. I think any of us that we've been in church any amount of time, we're going to be wounded. We're going to feel betrayed. We're going to be disappointed. We're going to go through that process. So you probably, even now, you need to ask God, reveal to me anything in my heart that is opposed to appointed leaders in my life. Is there a spirit of rebellion? Is there a spirit of unforgiveness? Is there anything going on in my life? Is there anything there that needs to be dealt with? Because I'll tell you straight up, you don't have the option to rebel against authority just because they don't lead the way that you presume they should. You don't have the option to rebel against authority just because they're not living a life that they should. The Hebrews, it would have been inappropriate for them to rebel against Pharaoh when they were in Egypt. Man, I've used this example so many times. So they were under the leadership of Pharaoh, God's appointed leader. God appointed Pharaoh. Come on. God appointed Pharaoh an evil leader. And the expectation was for the Hebrews to submit to the leadership of Pharaoh. So it would have been rebellion for the Hebrews, right, to leave Egypt without the approval and permission of Pharaoh. Think about it. Why did God need to go through some of the most amazing process that you can imagine? He raised up Moses. He saved Moses in a little basket, right? Moses gets introduced into Egypt, grows up in Egypt, goes through all of that, discovers his true identity. He flees into the wilderness. Decades go by. He has an encounter with God in a burning bush and has to deal with his own insecurities and an inability to speak, and God deals with all that. All while the Hebrews are still in bondage under Pharaoh. All of this is going on. The Hebrews, if they're like Americans, they'd be like, this isn't fair. I'm leaving right now. But they were there for decades. They endured for decades. Yet we can barely endure for a week if a stinking church service doesn't go the way that we want it to go. Come on. We can barely endure if we're not given a position in ministry. We can barely endure if there's not something there for our children. You selfish brats, come on. Ha. Stop it. Grow up. I'm saying it with a smile on my face because I'm full of love for you, and I don't even know who you are, but I know your situation, and I've met people like you that go through struggle, and I'm not even downplaying your struggle. Your struggle is real. It's real. I understand the torment. I understand the tears. I understand all of that. I get it. Come on. Come on. I've been in ministry. I've been in church for years like a lot of you. And the answer is not to be a complaining brat and to just remove ourselves from the place God's called us to serve. Right? Ministry is service. We serve, we die, we lay down our lives, we die to our own opinions, we give all of that up. It's not about us. See, again, in Egypt, so Moses is going through all this process, and finally he goes to Pharaoh and he's like, all right, Pharaoh, let my people go. This is what God says, let my people go. And have you ever stopped to wonder why God just didn't say, hey, I'm taking my people out? Why not? He easily could have done it. Why did they have to go from plague to plague to plague to plague to plague to try to convince Pharaoh, putting the pressure on Pharaoh? Why did God do that? Here's the answer. Because God gave Pharaoh. He delegated authority to Pharaoh, which means God couldn't go to the Hebrews and say, hey, I don't like what Pharaoh's doing. I need you to go ahead and leave. God couldn't do that. And he doesn't do that in churches today. It's like, hey, Pharaoh is not leading well. He doesn't care about you. He's not giving you a position. And so, your children aren't really benefiting from, this Egypt thing. And there's better stuff for you. I need you to go ahead and leave. It's time. Your time's up. It's time to go. God doesn't do that. See, he had to put the pressure on Pharaoh because Pharaoh was the only one that could release them. See, some of you are in this place where you've got this fantasy going on in your mind where you don't think human authority is of any significance at all. God establishes all authority. Okay, in the end, this is a trust issue. Do we trust God to help us through a very difficult situation? Or are we going to take matters into our own hands? Are we going to embrace a spirit of control? We're going to take control of our own situation, and we're going to go ahead and leave when things get tough. Okay? God had to raise up Moses, and God put the pressure on through Moses, and Pharaoh finally made the decree with his mouth, exactly according to God's plans. Remember, he relented to a degree several times. Well, you can kind of go, but come back, right? And God's, nope, more plagues. And finally he said, all right, God, you win. You may go. It was in that moment that the authority was transitioned from Pharaoh to Moses. Now they left. And you'll notice that God had the back of Moses. He had his back. Because now they all flee. You remember the story. Pharaoh's like, I'm going back. I'm going to get him. Chases after him. There's this wall of fire. I mean, you talk about God. Do you trust God to have your back? Do you trust him? Or are you just going to leave your church and go on to better things? A wall of fire. The Red Sea was split in two. And they entered in to the wilderness of encounter on their way to the land of promise. See, some of you have your thoughts on the land of promise. And that's good. See, God might be putting in you that it's time to move on from the church that you're in. I think what happens too often is people might hear a message like this and it freaks them out because they think they have to be in that church forever. And I always counsel them, listen, I think we overcomplicate this. This is not that difficult. This is not that hard. If you feel that God is calling you to move, to leave your church and go to another, all you have to do is ask. All you have to do is go to the pastor. Because the pastor needs to be a part of that. The pastor has been given authority over you. You know, one of my favorite stories of all time, amazing story. I was in Colorado, and there was a couple that they felt God was calling them to. I mean, you got to listen. Don't check out on me now. This is an amazing story. They felt that God was calling them to leave their church in Indiana and to move to Colorado. And so they started kind of connecting with us a little bit and learning about the ministry. And they really felt strongly that they were supposed to come. And so they were making plans. They were thinking about, what the process is going to be. They're getting ready to go. And in the process of all of that, they picked up my book, Covens in the Church, a previous version of it, because now the version includes this story that I'm telling right now. So they picked up the book and they started reading it. It was all about what I'm talking to you about right now, all about submission to authority. The Bible is very, very clear about that. It's very, very, very clear about that we are to submit to those who rule over us, okay? And they were reading that, and they told me, they said they read the first half of the book, and they said they felt a fence crawling up their spine. The Holy Spirit spoke to them and said, I need you to trust what I'm doing, and I need you to read the rest of the book. They said they read the rest of the book, and they were set free. And they were broken because they realized that they were dishonoring their pastor by considering moving to another state without his participation. And so they went to their pastor and they told him the story, and this is what we feel God's doing. And we want to honor you. We really do. You're our authority. You have authority in our lives. And we want you to know that we feel God's calling us out, but we know that God's called us to submit to you. If you do not feel we are to move and you feel we're supposed to stay here in Indiana, we're going to honor you and we're going to obey and we're going to submit to your leadership, and we will not move to Colorado. They said their pastor started crying, and he said this is the first time anybody has ever honored him with asking for his participation in a move like that. See, this is all about covenant, right? And there's too much breaking of covenant. There's too much divorce. I've shared recently in another broadcast that it would make no sense for one of my boys or girls to say, hey, I don't like the way the Burton family is being led. I'm I'm going to another family. It makes no sense, but it happens in churches all the time. And so the pastor, he said, yes, I absolutely bless you as you go. And they started praying for our ministry, and we started praying for their ministry. Well, the story doesn't end there. Shortly after that, God called my wife and myself to move from Colorado to Kansas City, Missouri, to be a part of the International House of Prayer. Well, I started directing one of the 4 primary internships there, and it was the very first class that I had, that we had. And so students are coming in on orientation day, and I had a copy of my book, Covens in the Church, that was part of what I was giving out for the curriculum. And there was a guy that came in, and I shook his hand and said, "How are you doing?" He said, "Oh yeah, I'm from so-and-so, Indiana." And I'm like, "Why does that ring a bell?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of that place." And he said, "Yeah, I was a pastor of a ministry there." And I'm like, "Oh, wait a minute." I said, "I know so-and-so. I think they may, do you know so-and-so?" And he's like, "Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they were a part of my church." And I said, "Whoa." I looked at him and I said, because I'd revised my book by then, I said, "You are in my book." And I grabbed a copy of Covens in the Church, I opened it up, and I had him read the story that I just shared. And he was just dumbfounded. And he said, "I've got to tell you, John, that was the healthiest transition from one ministry to another I've ever experienced in my life." And I saw how powerfully God moved in that when I felt God was calling me to move here to Kansas City, I did the exact same thing. I went to my leadership and I told them, "I feel like I'm supposed to go, but I honor you as my authority. I'm going to submit to that authority. I'm going to obey the direction that you give us. And if you don't think we're supposed to go to Kansas City, we will not go." And they blessed us as we went. See, this is how it's supposed to work. The question at the end of the day is, do you trust God? Do you not believe that God knows exactly the situation that you're in a difficult church? Do you not believe that he is able to do like he did with Pharaoh and bring the pressure or do the things necessary to get you to move from that place to the next place that he has for you? Or do you have to simply take control of the situation yourself? You know, I didn't get into any of my notes this time around. I just had to get this out here. My heart is that there will be a people that will respond rightly to this, because again, there's so much independence out there. There's so much distrust of human leaders. There's so much distrust of God. There's so much, there's angst out there. There's stress. There's all of this going on because we misunderstand our role in the church. Our role in the church isn't to sit there and say, "All right, come on, feed me, come on, feed me, give me what I want. Give me what I want. I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave if you don't. Do what I say. Do what I want." Right? I'm not going to give you tithe. I'm taking my tithe back. If you don't give me what I demand. I mean, that's a demonic spirit if there is one, right? So how in the world, with this situation going on, do we think that we can see a move of God on a city level when there's going to be very inconvenient instructions on a city level, inconvenient calls? How do we think we're going to be able to respond to that? You know, submission isn't really submission if we only submit to the point where we agree and then we stop at the point of disagreement. We're going to be called into some very difficult situations. There are going to be solemn assemblies called. Will you respond? See, that's why it's so difficult nowadays for prophetic voices, for national prophets and leaders to get anything done, because they give a decree and nobody responds. You know, I think about when Lou Engle came to Detroit, and in preparation for the call, they rented out Ford Field, a stadium that seats, 70,000 people. And he had to come for a year, visit it over and over and over and over again for a year prior to this solemn assembly, the call at Ford Field in 2011, to connect with pastors and encourage leaders. And I mean, Lou Engle's a champion. and investing all of this time and energy just to get people on the same page and get us together to pray one day at Ford Field. And that never should have been necessary. He should have announced, he could have announced it a week before. Said, we've secured Ford Field next Sunday. We need everybody, every Christian, every pastor, every leader, every believer in the city of Detroit. This is a solemn assembly. This is a call of a prophetic voice. Everybody must show up at Ford Field next Sunday. Cancel your church services, cancel everything you're doing. This is a city church call. And the expectation should have been for everyone to show up. But we can't even show up on time for church on a regular Sunday. We're holding our pastors hostage. And we're only going to submit to them if they lead the way we want them to. So pastors have to become salesmen instead of prophetic voices. They got to sell what they're calling people into instead of simply leading and expecting people to follow. And I know this makes a lot of you uneasy because we like to maintain control of our lives. But that's why this situation is the way it is in our nation, in the church. We're powerless, we're disorganized. I think about the Muslims. Think about them. Think about how, they're making plans to advance Sharia law in the state of Michigan, I know, by 2025. Because they're organized. I've shared the story many times of in Dearborn, Michigan, where it's the greatest percentage of Muslims live than any other city in the nation. And a friend of mine, Joe Sazik, was on his way to a prayer meeting on a Monday morning at 6 a.m., and he drives by the largest mosque, and he said the parking lot was packed. The streets around it were packed. Couldn't find a place to park if you tried, and the people were just flooding in to the call to prayer on a Monday morning at 6 a.m. And he goes to his church on the way to his own prayer meeting, and there was one person there. Are we gonna understand that calls to pray are not optional? Are we gonna understand that calls to be in position are not optional? You look at different churches around the world. Chinese church, man, they make a call, boom, they're in position. I've shared the story of a pastor in Haiti, a friend of mine, and he felt so strongly that he needed an all-church prayer meeting. And he called an all-church prayer meeting. He said, you all need to be here. And I think he had about 1,400 people in the church at the time. And almost all of them showed up, but there was a handful who didn't. Said right after that, I think it was the next week, I don't know the time frame exactly, shortly after that, he was supposed to be speaking at an event on a particular morning. He woke up that morning, and God told him, he said, you're going to stay home and pray. You're going to send your wife. She's going to speak, but you're going to pray. So he stayed and he prayed and ended up falling asleep in prayer. Woke up later that afternoon at around 3 o'clock and was getting ready to go to the evening service. He got up, went to go into the bathroom, and it was at that time that the terrifying earthquake struck the nation of Haiti. And he says that he knows entire churches where 100% of the people in the church died. He said of his church, every person that responded to his call to show up at the prayer meeting, none of them died, 0. But some of those who did not show up to the prayer meeting did die. We need to understand the call to respond to authority, or we can't have any hope of seeing anything on a city level take place. Some of you need to be healed from woundings, false expectation. God will allow us to go through difficult situations. He'll allow us to go through betrayal. He'll allow us to go through even mean-spirited leaders. He'll allow us to go through these things. Look at Joseph. He was thrown into a pit. Leaders threw him into prison. But he held his heart right, and God promoted him. Some of you need to get in touch with a pastor maybe that you left his church years ago, and you need to apologize for leaving your post, wounding the church as you leave, leaving things undone, dropping the arms of your pastor, refusing to stand in the gap and intercede, refusing to receive a blessing as you go. Again, will God call us from one church to another? He does. I think it's more uncommon than we would think. But if it's really happening, all you need to do is go talk to your pastor about it. Really, it's not that hard. Go to your pastor, share with them what's going on, pray for a blessing, ask for a blessing. Yes, I bless you. Leave in a healthy way. Bless them as you go. Or maybe he'll says, no, I feel you need to stay through. I've had people come to me, and I say, you know what? I don't think you're supposed to go. I think there's unfinished things. And I knew that they had character issues, and they just wanted to run. And they didn't want to stay and grow and learn and go low and humble themselves and work out this issue, because I know that issue was going to follow them to their next church. Right? You know. So, if we want to have a city outpouring, we're going to have to learn how to submit to leadership. We're going to have to learn how to love them well. We're going to have to learn how to be instant in and out of season. We're going to have to be responsive. Because if we're not, we're just going to keep going on the way that we're going. We need to break that independent spirit off of us. And we need to learn how to trust God and his process and his timing again, because he is the one that establishes all authority, good and evil. Amen? Okay. I know you're going to contact me about this. You're going to ask me all sorts of questions. You'll say, John, what if we're being abused in our church? My answer to that always is if your life is truly in danger, if there's a child molester leading a Sunday school class, if something like that, call the police and get out. Call the police and get out. Okay, very, very clear. Move out of harm's way. Still pray. Still pray for that situation, but explain what's going on. Be involved in the process. Absolutely move out of harm's way. But true abuse, and I know I get all sorts of nasty comments when I talk about this. True abuse in a church is extremely rare. Now, those who have been truly abused would say, "You've got to be kidding me. This is all I know." Well, you need to understand that you're going through it. And I'm sorry that you're going through it. I really am. But your experience, it really isn't that common. I mean, I travel all the time. I mean, I've been in so many different churches. And it's rare for me to find a pastor that's out of sorts. They're kind, and they're real, and they're hungry for God, and not perfect. But true abusive situations are extremely rare. You know, when I talk about abuse, I'm talking about someone came up to me once and told me that they were on a journey of forgiveness, and because she was raised in a satanic coven, basically, or a satanic group or something that took place in a church, and she was actually abused for Satan. And there were church leaders involved in that, and she would talk about how she was literally abused, satanic ritual abuse, and how she's been on this journey of forgiveness. So when people tell me they were abused in the church, I want to ask them, did that happen to you? It doesn't mean I'm minimizing what they've gone through, because I know it hurts. I've been wounded, I've been betrayed, I've been all of these kinds of things. But I could never put abuse, I could never label abuse. And I'll tell you, I've been through things where most people would call it abuse. If I shared the story of how I was treated just through the years, people would say, John, that's spiritual abuse. You were abused. And I'd say, no, I wasn't abused. God allowed me to be in that situation for my own growth. There was a time that a pastor that I looked up to a long time ago, I was in his office, and he just reamed me. And he was just you don't hear God, you don't know what you're doing, kind of a thing. And I'm like, I left that meeting like, you can imagine. I mean, I was just ripped up. I'm like, man. I mean, he ripped. It was inappropriate. It was wrong what he said. It was cold-hearted. It was cruel. It was wrong. My wife was there too. Same thing with her. And we left this pastor's office just ripped to shreds, licking our wounds. What in the world just happened? But we had to hold our heart right. And we went back to his office the next week for another meeting. We were just chatting about ministry stuff. I wanted to get his input on ministry stuff. And I was a young leader, and I was learning, and he was just saying, he's just ripping me up. But the second meeting, he gave me a hug, and he said, "You passed the test." He said, I have had senior pastors, senior leaders walk out of my office, but you held your heart right, and you passed the test, and he gave me a big hug. And some of you be thinking, what a horrible test that was. I did not like that test either. I can't imagine myself putting anyone through a test like that. I don't think it was a right thing to do. But he was saying all of these things to try to push my buttons, to see how I would respond. Would I respond with a good heart? Would I respond by blessing him? Would I respond by honoring him? Would I respond by being teachable, even though he was teaching me in a very cruel manner? Or would I flee? Would I gossip about him? Would I run for cover? How would I respond? And even though it hurt, I passed the test, right? God will allow you to be in very cruel situations under leaders that can be very mean for the sake of your own character development. If you are truly being abused, get out of harm's way. But if you're simply being challenged, you're taking a few blows, your character is being hit, assassinated, you're being accused, whatever, respond in love. And I'll finish by saying this, as I've said so many times. Today, when people are rejected in the church, they leave the church. When they're abused in the church, when they're wounded in the church. I'm using abused on a lesser level right now. If you're truly abused, leave. Follow my point. People that are wounded, people that are betrayed, people that are ill-spoken of, people that are not valued. Today, they leave the church because we live in a very me-centric society, a narcissistic society where it's all about us. When that happens, when we're rejected, we leave the church. But when Jesus was rejected and truly abused, hated, despised, spit on, mocked, he died for the church. He loved those who were persecuting him. Do you love your pastor if he's persecuting you? I want the city church. I want the city fire. I want the multitudes to respond. But we're going to have to figure out this love thing. We're going to have to learn how to love our leaders. We're going to have to learn how to passionately support them, even in very difficult situations. Okay, I think you get the point. I really do want you to contact me. I really do want to hear from you about this. What do you think about this? It's very easy to think about the leader. Well, what about the leader? What's his responsibility? That's not your concern. You know, just like a waitress at a restaurant. We don't tip her based on how she serves us. That's inappropriate. No matter if her service is good or bad, we should still tip her very well because we're called to bless. Same thing with our leaders. We don't invest in them based on how they treat us. We invest in them to bless them. We don't try to hold them accountable. See, I'm not there to hold the waitress accountable and make her jump through my hoops. I'm there to bless her. Okay? Same thing with leadership. Let God take care of the leaders. Trust him to do that. and he will. All right? Okay, I want to thank you guys, as always, for being very, very faithful. And I know some of you are still in the process of, discovery. Are you going to be connecting with us as your local church? Meaning, are you gathering together with other leaders in a home? And this is the ministry that you're using right now to bring some impact to your lives. And if that's the case, I just want to thank you for the tithes. It's important for the tithe to come into the storehouse. Others of you, you're participating in a different way. You're watching these videos and you're growing. You're being impacted that way. And for those of you, you can give offerings, and that's a blessing too. This ministry is completely funded through tithes and offerings of people that are watching. Something else that I want to share with you that you can consider. Go to, I don't have it on the screen for you, but go to carriersoffire.org/network. carriersoffire.org/network. And you can learn how to join this network as an affiliate ministry or an affiliate church or an affiliate minister. So we'll be your spiritual encouragement, your apostolic partner. And I know a lot of people out there, they've been asking me, is there a way I can actually join with your network and be an affiliate and connect? And absolutely there is. If you have questions about that, you can contact me directly, but go to carriersoffire.org/network. Okay, and you can learn all about that. It's a really, really powerful opportunity. As you do that, you'll have free admission to our School of Revival, and you'll receive a media partner membership at no cost as well, so you can access all of our archived media. Okay, so let me pray for you, and we'll be done here. Father, in Jesus' name, I pray for people that are struggling. I pray for people that need healing in their lives, those that have been wounded, God, in church, which is probably most of us, if not all of us. I pray that you would touch them. You would just heal them. You'd encourage them. I pray it would be easy for them to forgive. It'd be easy for them to bless those, God, who have troubled them. Bless those who have cursed them. Lord, I pray in Jesus' name that we would see a city a fire, God, where we can come together on a city level and we can respond to apostolic leaders as they call solemn assemblies, and we can be in position, Lord, and not looking out for ourselves and not narcissistic and not being ultra protective, God, but where we're laying down our lives, God, for others. I pray, Lord, that we would take up our cross, and everyone that's watching, that they would enjoy the blessing of laying down their lives for others, laying down their lives for leaders, laying down their lives for the lost. And God, I pray they would trust you like never before. Lord, I pray, God, for everybody's finances, they would explode. I pray, God, that there would be provision as people are faithful in giving. God, that they would have an amazing financial portfolio, that you would bless, that you would provide every need as your word promises. God, that they would see their stress decrease, and they would be completely in awe of how you come through in their lives. So I just pray blessing over everybody in Jesus' name. All right, there you go. Next week, we're going to continue in this series, 4 Fires, and can't wait to see you again. All right.